I had a hard time accepting spirituality and this stuff because the narrative kind of in science is like, oh, you're like stupid if you believe that, and like, you fell for it, or there's just all these narratives, and so it's kind of truly difficult to be okay with it. But once I worked through it and got to the end, it was like, oh, spirituality is really valuable. It drastically changed my life. It made my everyday living better by using that spiritual framework of, oh, what if we come here to learn lessons, and what if we reincarnate, and what if we are spiritual beings? And if I took that narrative and spun it in my everyday life and asked myself, okay, instead of crying in the corner about, I don't know, why a project isn't going my way and feeling like a victim, what if I asked instead, what am I supposed to be learning right now? Or how is the universe mirroring me? Then that immediately improved my life.
Mona, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Very good. Very excited to be having this conversation. So many things I want to talk to you about, but I think one of the reasons I was interested to have you on the show is you've kind of lived on both sides of this perceived tension between the world of science and the world of spirituality. And a thing that I've heard you say that I've observed in my own experience that I would love to kind of open this up with is there's actually a lot of science that substantiates a lot of this phenomena that we consider quote unquote spiritual. Yet for some reason, there seems to be a reticence amidst the science world to fully embrace and acknowledge it. And it's almost as if people kind of abandoned the follow the evidence when it comes to spirituality. And I would, as a neuroscientist, I would love to get your perspective on why that is.
Yes, very important topic. Why that is, there are multiple reasons for it. I think, so to take a historical perspective, so there's a few levels. So if I take a historical perspective and we rewind time, there was a time around the time of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution when science started to be really good, right? And the scientific method started to work. People could measure things, they could make accurate predictions, they could build technologies. We started to understand the world around us. So, there was like a delicate balance between the church, of course, and science. Eventually, there started to be a kind of a separation. And I think in the last 100 years, or a few hundred years, definitely the last 100, that has really solidified, right? And it has just become a very, very a stern and serious wall between science and religion or spirituality, with this kind of story of, well, those things are a separate thing. It falls under religion, spirituality, the humanities, and it's separate from science. And okay, you can believe in that if it gives you comfort, right? We have the whole evolutionary story of like, oh, humans evolved to have to believe in spirituality or religion as a comforting mechanism for ourselves. And so we just keep them separate. I think that's the historical reason. And then if you want the personal psychological reason why, like individuals like myself would scoff at paranormal findings or, psychic phenomena or even spiritual, whatever, any kind of research you want to look at, it's because we get self-worth and self-value from our identity as scientists. A lot of us, I did. And you kind of build this identity around being a very smart, serious person that people take seriously and who people go to for answers. You're an expert, you have the answers. And especially in our Western society, science is put on a pedestal, right? We turn to science and facts. So you get a lot of your identity and self-worth out of that. And for some reason, like I said earlier, we don't categorize religion and spirituality under that umbrella. It's separate. So that kind of threatens your identity and your self-worth. And so you push back. And I know this because that's how I used to be. And I would get really angry really angry. I'd be like, God, people are so stupid. Like, don't they know science is the way? And like, so they know there's no truth to spirituality and religion. And so I know that because I never looked into the research, I took, the mainstream narrative at its face value. I was like, yeah, someone must have looked into this at some point and not found any evidence or disproved it. And that's why we all believe this, that there is nothing more than this physical reality. And so I believed it and I never looked into it. And so I just propagated it. And then anybody who argued otherwise, I just, was condescending to and kind of was like, you don't know what you're talking about. Meanwhile, P.S. I didn't know what I was talking about. But so I think there's that. And then I do think also just from a like intellectual, if you're really going to get into these topics, they're not easy to classify. And while I like to believe that science and spirituality are the same thing, like I believe we live in one universe, so it's all got to be the same. I do think that the scientific method is better at examining physical phenomena, and certain kinds of phenomena and not others. And I don't think the universe is under any obligation to give us phenomena in one form or another. And what I mean by that is a lot of times this phenomena is not reproducible, it's not repeatable, and it's not predictable, right? Anybody who is engaged in this kind of stuff, it's not like you have total control over it. And that doesn't work with science. That doesn't work.
So the universe isn't set up to validate our experiments? That's crazy. That's
No,
exactly
yeah.
what I thought the purpose of life was. Well, how about
Yeah.
that?
I think a lot of people have forgotten that. It is under no obligation to give us her secrets in the way and format that we demand it.
Yeah, the irony of, as we're talking about this, what comes up for me is the irony of trying too hard to understand and make sense and put the mystery in a box actually can obstruct you from experiencing it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think so. That's funny you say that because when I came to this journey, my obsession, the way I really got into it was I need to understand the mechanism. Like, I have got to know the mechanism behind this. Is, let's say psychic phenomena a non-material, non-physical thing, or can we measure it with electromagnetic? Like I wanted to know the physics of it. And after a while, after I did read so many different models and scientific papers on it, at some point I just didn't care anymore. And I was like, it's a mystery similar to many things in science. There's so many things in science that we can't explain, that we have no understanding of whatsoever. And in fact, I would say most things, even though we pretend we know everything, there are most things we cannot explain. We just have guesses and theories. And those change all the time. So at some point, I just gave into the mystery and I was like, this is actually way better than my mind spinning in circles, trying to figure it out. Is to just be like, you know what? Who knows? Who knows how it works?
I love that. There's so much beauty in that. And my question for you is, how has your experience changed as you've settled into that?
Well, first of all, there's a lot less angst and a lot less energy being spent all the time and trying to figure things out. Like, my brain was always, twirling and working and, oh, I need to. And a lot of that has just been let go. So there's just a lot less attachment to ideas and processes, I think. So it's really so much better this way. And I can't say I came to it consciously. It just kind of happened one day. So I'm not trying to say that I decided this. It was the right choice. It just kind of happened one day. I just kind of didn't care about the mechanism anymore, while recognizing that yes, it's important to think about these things and write about them and to do science, of course, because why wouldn't we do that? We do that with everything. But just, for me personally, I had to, like, being in relationship with this concept, I thought, okay, well, sometimes we don't have the answer to everything. And I think maybe it's easier to do because in neuroscience, we don't have a lot of answers to most things about the brain. Like, we don't know how
Mm,
consciousness is generated. We don't really know how memory works. We don't know a lot of things. So maybe I just reached some point where I was like, oh, this is kind of like everything else in neuroscience.
definitely sounds more peaceful. I'll say that for sure. I think it's one of the really fascinating things that I've observed is a lot of people in their unconscious desire to protect themselves are so adamant about poking holes in things. An example that comes up for me is I personally have the worldview that many things that are happening, perhaps everything that's happening, is actually all in order to bring us back to the realization of the divine beings that we are. And life kind of gives us this wonderful curriculum to experience that and look at our reactions. And I notice a lot of kind of skeptics will look at that and go, yeah, but that's just a way for you to make everything like turn into something good, you know? And it's just so funny to me because I'm like, yeah, but that makes my life better. Like,
Yes.
who freaking cares?
Yeah,
If it makes your
totally.
life better, like, who really cares about being right? And
Hmm.
I'm sure you've experienced something similar in your own transformation and in the world of science.
1000%. Actually, that was part of the reason I wrote my book was because it was so hard for me mentally to go through this journey of, realizing that my self-worth was tied to my identity as a scientist, realizing that a lot of my emotional reactions to things were, my issues, not because I was defending
Mm,
science. And I think, I had a hard time accepting spirituality and this stuff because the narrative kind of in science is like, oh, you're like stupid if you believe that, and like, you fell for it, or there's just all these
mm,
narratives. And so it's kind of truly difficult to be okay with it. um But once I worked through it and got to the end, it was that I was like, oh, spirituality is really valuable. It drastically changed my life. It made my everyday living better by using that spiritual framework of, oh, what if we come here to learn lessons? And what if we reincarnate? And, what if we are spiritual beings? And if I took that narrative and spun it in my everyday life and asked myself, okay, instead of crying in the corner about, I don't know, why a project isn't going my way and feeling like a victim, what if I asked instead, what am I supposed to be learning right now? Or how is the universe mirroring me?
mm,
Then that immediately improved my life. And that question that I had of why are we here and what's the meaning of life? A lot of things I read at the time, past life regression and spiritual literature like that, they would say, oh, it's just to enjoy life, like it's to enjoy being in this physical body. And then I suddenly started enjoying my cup of coffee and my walks and started noticing, being mindful and like when I'm on my walk, why am I thinking about my emails?
mhm.
Stop doing that. So it drastically changed the quality of my life. And I thought, oh my God, like we've been conned in science. Like they told us that I mean, they were right. Like, um, it does comfort you, and maybe it is only there to comfort you, except it's not, because then I found the evidence. But then and I thought, even if it's not and we evolved to be this way, then why would you take that away from us, and it was kind of, I wrote the book kind of to be like to other people, to other scientists, I mean, in particular, like, first of all, these are human experiences, they're typical, they're common, there's science behind it, there's some evidence, but more importantly, it doesn't matter if it's important to you and it feels good and it improves your life like it did for me. You should just embrace it. Who cares what your colleagues think?
Yeah, totally. Well, thankfully, there does seem to be, and granted, I'm not in the industry, right? I'm not a researcher, but there does seem to be a tone shift over the past 5 to 10 years, which
Yeah.
I anticipate accelerating. And one of the questions I had for you is, so you published this book, you kind of had a coming out party, if you will. about this side of yourself. How has it been received in the science community?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, somebody early on, I was really worried about this, obviously, but somebody, a tenured neuroscientist who I spoke to, who's into these topics too, told me, he's like, I wouldn't worry too much. He's like, really, the people who probably wouldn't agree with you probably won't read your book,
Mm,
probably won't listen to the podcasts you do, and probably won't even be aware of you. So he's like, you're probably worrying about it way more than you should. And I think to a large extent that's been true. It has, which has been beautiful. I brought the people who agree out or who are curious. You know, I've had a lot of scientists reach out to me to tell me their experiences. So I think that part of it's been really beautiful. Um, but I haven't had, I mean, early on when I was in the book, I interview some of my colleagues, you know, some of them I remember. I mean, all of them were very careful about what they said, even though we were having conversations in private, which I thought was so funny. And I'm sure I was too, but it's just this natural thing that we do. And we always, you know, we may say something weird and then we'll say, but you know, like, who knows? We'll have to, you know,
right, right. The
it was
preface.
that, yeah, we just preface everything. And so it hasn't been as bad, but I also don't work. I'm not a research scientist anymore at a university. Um, and so I can't really speak about that. But that person I spoke with was, and he said that he's like, nobody even reads my stuff. He's like, so it's not really an issue. So I don't know, but
It's an empowering mindset, though. I think for people that are listening to the show, your experience is not too dissimilar from my experience being in the business world. It's like I'm starting to do things like post on LinkedIn about spirituality, which is like just a money making cesspool of conversation, and what you that was very scary at a certain juncture. But I think what your experience is so on the money for people listening. It's like those that resonate, you're giving them permission to be more of that part of themselves. And those that don't resonate with that probably aren't going to read it, don't care about you, aren't going to take the time to reach out. So, as far as I'm concerned, there's just way more upside.
yes. Yeah. And I think I totally agree with that. And I think also when you connect with people who do resonate, there's something so beautiful between you that it's like so rewarding, that you really start to not care, because you think, oh my God, like in some way allowed this. Like, so I had some neuroscientists reach out to me who never told anyone these stories. Like, I was the first, and I'm a stranger to them, you know? And so I thought, how crazy and how sad for all of us. But I was so grateful that I could do that for them. I was like, of course I'll listen. But um, when you have an experience like that, I think you care less what someone who doesn't agree with things, because then you think, oh my God, if I had never said anything, that person never would have told that story to anyone, or they would have had to wait to find someone else. Um, and that's more important than hearing something negative or hearing from someone who doesn't agree with you.
Yeah, it's a very I agree, kind of difficult thing to wrap your head around, that some of the most meaningful parts of your life, I feel like many people feel like 99% of the people that they know, they can't talk to about it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
I think it's just to speak to the work that you're doing, I think it just is a really, really awesome thing for people to go out there and to be putting their information and stories out about these topics, because it is gradually helping more and more people have permission for sharing these experiences that, by the way, historically, across most cultures, like this was it. You know what I mean? Like, we gathered in sacred places, did rituals, had experiences, and it was a part of life. And, it's been kind of sucked out, but hopefully slowly becoming more normalized again.
Yeah, and you're right about scientists being more open. I think that with the move into psychedelics research really expanding, there's been a lot of new research centers opening around psychedelics and consciousness, uh, and in general, with more people, let's say, having done psychedelics or even having, I think there's like a statistic that more people than ever have had more spiritual awakenings than ever
Mm.
before. So I think with all of that, you just find a little more open-mindedness, which is pretty nice. Which is really, I think, all we're asking for is a little open-mindedness. It's like, especially in science, it's like you just have to be open to the conversations. You don't have to believe or take a side, but we do have to be open.
Totally. I agree. I think that's the most supportive posture. I want to talk about your specific transformation for a second. You had this identity as this kind of hard charging neuroscientist, and obviously that has shifted. What were the most difficult parts of moving through that transformation for you?
Yeah. The beginning was really hard because it was hard because I didn't realize that what I talked about earlier about my self-worth being tied to my identity, I didn't have that awareness at all at
Mm.
first. So I was just flying in the dark. And I just knew that my nervous system was on fire. Like I was so uncomfortable all the time with all this information, and my mind would not stop spinning about like, could it be right? Could it be wrong? But what about
Mm.
this? So I read all these past life regression therapy books, and then I read psychic phenomena research papers. There was so much, so all that evidence, the NDE stuff, I was crunching it in my brain over and over and over again every morning to be like, oh no, you fell for it. You were stupid. But then I would have to review the evidence to be like, no, like it's pretty convincing. Like, I don't know, unless
Good
I'm
for you
nuts.
for
Like,
being objective. I'm sure a lot of people would be selectively looking for the thing that disproved,
yeah, it was over it, but it was tiring. It was very tired. It's mentally, I think the word is mental anguish is a good word. It was just a lot of mental anguish. And then, like I said, my nervous system was on fire. So then, it was hard to move through that. Like I spent a lot of nights crying on the floor. Like, I tell people the story. I like had ordered a bunch of books because I was talking to these researchers that work for the government that did all kinds of like weirdo research, and they're like, order this, order this, order this. So I ordered all these books, and then one night I looked at my pile of books, and they were all like weird, stuff. And I started like crying hysterically because I was like, oh my God, I'm the type of person who reads this stuff now. Like I used to look down on these people, and I was like, my soul was the happiest I had ever been. Like I was vibrating with joy reading these books. And so I imagine how confused I was. Like mental anguish, nervous system on fire, but soul very happy.
Were
Like
you
I
were you
was
able to distinguish that in the moment, like as you were reading them? Like you're like, okay, something's right here, even though something's wrong here.
Yes, because I had goosebumps, like
Mm.
my felt like my crown, like my head would open. I don't know how else to explain it. It's weird, but like with joy. So it was a whole embodied experience of like it felt so right. And I've always had a very strong intuition. So I know like I've always known when to email people or like timing wise I've always been good. If you asked me, I wouldn't admit to it or I wouldn't talk about it or I wouldn't say it was spiritual or anything, but I knew that I was good at that. And so it was that. So when I was reading the books, I was like, oh no, this is that. Like, this is whatever that is. This is in line with that. When something feels right and I know it in my whole body, that's what this is. And so I was just very confused. And I was like upset. I was like, why does this have to make my soul happy right now? I mean, I didn't even refer to it as my soul. I was just like, why is this bringing me joy? Can't what I do for work bring me joy? So I was really sad about that, even though my like body was happy reading that stuff and like taking this journey. And so it was just perpetually confusing, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, and then somebody, well, I had this conversation with a psychologist who was also a psychic medium. And I was like, look, listen, you just got to tell me what's wrong with me. I can't take it. I know I'm supposed to come to it on my own in therapy, but I've been in therapy. I don't have time for this. Like, you just
Just
have to
give
tell
me
me.
the codes.
Yeah. And he just was like, and then he explained that. He's like, oh, your self-worth comes from your identity as a scientist. He's like, because for whatever reason, when you were young, you felt like you needed to be smart to be valuable. And it could have come from society, it could have come from your family or culture, but that's what it is. And he's like, so your problem with spirituality is that you think you have to give that up, you won't be valuable anymore, you won't be smart anymore. And he just like laid it out. And of course, when someone tells you the truth about yourself, you never accept it. And I was like, that's not what this is. So I had to like, and then I had to go sit with it for like 3 months. And then it unraveled slowly in my mind. And then I realized how right he was. And I was like, oh, I see. And then suddenly I could start seeing the distinctions of like, oh, this is my ego now. This is my ego, the one crying on the floor. And and I started to just recognize those moments and tap into it. And that started to really help a lot, because then I could see the thoughts and see the ego without identifying with it. And I could just feel into things more easily, and, started to learn to trust. That was hard too, because most people go into science for control. That's another aspect. Like, we come in to understand our environment, to control our environments, right? To control every variable in our experiments. And then when you come to spirituality and they're like, you just got to trust, you're like, what?
This is the opposite of the script I have been fed.
Yeah, like actually, yeah. And it's the opposite of, evidence-based, data-backed, science-driven. Like, it's the opposite of that. And so that was hard to kind of trust, fall into that. But it all just was a long, slow process. It just takes time. And I just think one thing that helped a lot which is funny, because before I went on this journey, I didn't understand the saying, have compassion for yourself. But after being on the journey, I was like, yeah, you really do have to just be like, hey, I am where I am. And if today I'm going to cry, then I'm going to cry, and it's fine. This journey is not linear. There's no guidebook. This shit is hard. So
yeah,
it is what it is.
It's remarkable, the ego's ability to, act in disguise, right? That like it's the thing that I find most difficult about communicating the experience you just described to people that are not kind of on the journey, because explaining that, like, the thoughts and reasoning in your mind that quote unquote makes sense is actually driven by an invisible master that feels a deficit is just like not a concept that you can really explain unless people kind of come to that in their own revelation.
Yeah, I agree. And I remember reading all some of that literature before I experienced what I just discussed about, oh, I started to notice my thoughts and ego are separate. Before that, I remember reading, that you could do that with practice. Or I remember scoffing every time I read "You are not your thoughts," and I was like, "What the hell are they talking about?"
Right.
As a neuroscientist, I was like, "You are your thoughts," um, because I had never, I mean, up to that point, I was, and I also think I had lived in that state for so long, right? That when you never experience living in a different kind of state, a different kind of beingness, of course you don't think it's possible, right? How could you? You don't have that you just don't have that experience in your toolbox to be like, oh yeah, I could be another way. And that's what I started to see with the spirituality. I mean, like I said, that simple psychological reframing tool that I used every day of like, what if I reframe this to say, what lesson am I supposed to be learning? That was a sudden experience shift. And I think that was the first time I was like, oh my God, like there isn't a whole other way that I could live and be alive. And it might be easier than what I've been doing. And so, and that just started to continue unfolding. And once like a shift like that happens once, then suddenly it's in your experience and awareness. Oh, I could probably shift other things. Other things could probably change. And so it just becomes easier, and it continues to happen. But yeah, I never I think back to that time, to that person I was when all of this was happening, and I would have like not upset, like not like obsessive compulsion, but like I would have like my mind races a lot. So and likes to work on problems till I get them. So when this started arising, it was like just a constant cycling. And I did not feel like I could ever stop my thoughts. Like I had no control over my mind whatsoever or my emotions. Um, and so I think I really didn't believe that would ever change. But hey, guys, it worked. You just have to meditate a lot and start becoming aware. But yeah, I've completely changed that. Now I'm very aware, right, of like the thoughts that come up and what's my ego and what's not. And I mean, I'm not perfect. Obviously, I'm still learning, but it just becomes easier. And it's like I said, it's remarkable. It's remarkable, really, the way that you can change.
It is. It is. It's one of the fascinating things about consciousness because, you know, you're limited by what you can conceive of.
Mhm.
And so what we think life can be, like, I know one thing that I'm passionate about in business is like showing people there's another way to get things done. Like you can accomplish things and it doesn't have to be like on the back of like insane, like crazy efforting, like all like just kind of all the old mantras. And it's like until someone witnesses a new way, they're just not going to be receptive to it. And so
Yeah.
it's very fascinating. And I think it also gives you reverence for like this notion that like everyone is on their own unique
Hmm.
path,
Yeah.
journey, timeline. And, you know,
Yeah.
you have to respect that.
Yeah. And I know it's hard to at the beginning of the journey, you want everyone to be on it with you. So like the book that I read that changed everything for me or started to was Many Lives, Many Masters. And I mean, I bought that book for all my friends and sent it to all of them and made them all read it because I was like, I'm going down, you're all coming with me. But I mean, what I meant was I wanted them to read it and we could discuss it. And I was like, am I nuts for thinking this is a really interesting story? It was a case study, a psychiatrist case study. And you get, I think, let's say if I sent it to 10 friends, one of them wouldn't read it, didn't want to. One of them, or many of them read it, were intrigued, but, simply moved on with their lives. And then I would say maybe like one or two were flipped and were like, whoa, what is this? Like, let's talk about it. Um, and I think that was a really educational moment to realize that not everyone is going to be at the level you are. Like you really do need something to crack you open to be open to these things sometimes. Like I was not open before. I was kind of in an existential despair situation to begin
Right.
with. And so I opened to it. So I think just recognizing that people are at different levels and at times in their life, and like that's okay. You can't force everyone to join you on the journey. So it's important, but it is hard because the people you grown up with or the people you used to relate to, suddenly things start to shift.
I think that is really one of the hardest things about this is navigating the relationships. You know, it's just like, how do
Oh yeah.
you, I don't know about you, but like so many times I'm like, I feel like no one around me understands me.
Oh my
And
God,
like
1000%.
I'm in these old scenarios that I used to love that I'm now like hating and I'm sticking in it because I want to feel like I have some friends. Like it's
Yeah,
very, very
totally.
difficult.
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really lonely. Like I've had too many moments like that where I'm just sitting and it feels like I'm frozen and the scene is just going on without me. And I'm like, what am I doing here? And like, why do I feel so separate from everything and everyone? Um, and I tried to ignore it, but it's kind of hard to ignore. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. But yeah, it is one of the hardest parts. And I don't know, I'm still trying to navigate that myself. It's my therapist says that you don't have to have the same interests with all of your friends. So I try to keep that in mind. But I do think that with spirituality, sometimes it's hard because it's such a big part of your life and it's such a big way of being. And it's like, it starts to seep into everything, the way you
Right.
think, the way your worldview, the way you communicate, the things you want to do, the things you want to share, that it does, I think, more so than just hobbies. Like it does kind of become this big issue of like, you do need to find a community. You do need to find people, at on the same wavelength as you, as they say. And yeah, I mean, I'm working through that with you. I'm right there with you.
It's why many like community gathering and church and different wisdom school and traditions, it's like why it's always been a thing, because going on the journey alone is it's just so hard. And
Really hard.
I would imagine that since you've kind of been more public about your interests, that has kind of opened up the aperture for more people that are on the journey to come into your life.
Yes. I mean, yes, I definitely have a lot of new contacts and people from various walks of life. Yeah, who are on, but surprisingly, no one's ever on the exact same. I guess it's like we're all a little bit different. But I do need more of a community in LA, I think. Like I'm from LA originally, and I live here, and I have childhood friends who are my best friends. And I love them and I love hanging out with them. But I definitely am like now starting to look at, and thank goodness it's Los Angeles and not somewhere random, like in the middle of the, I don't know, whatever, middle of the country. It's like a, bustling urban city that I feel like I do need to find more community, a little more, like you said, like events, gatherings,
Yeah.
like places where we can come together to talk about these issues, where it's not just me talking at someone because I need to talk and they need to listen to be polite. Yeah, I do think I'm interested in building that too. So I'm starting to I think like I've been in this COVID like quarantine mindset still, and I'm like breaking out of it. Like, hey, you can actually, all these people
Nice.
you're emailing and Zooming, like you can go meet them in person if they're in LA. So I've been doing more lunches and hike meetings and things like that, because I do have the goal of doing that, of kind of bringing people together to, maybe small dinners or things like that. Because I've had a lot of people express that to me too. They're like, I wish I had more community around this. And we've looked into it, and I haven't found a lot here, so I'll just start it.
It's not an LA phenomenon. I feel very similarly. But I think it's going to get easier as this stuff becomes more normalized. And so
Yeah, hopefully.
that's, I feel like 5 years ago when this all started for me, I didn't really know a single person I could talk to. And I feel like now I have, a handful of dear friends that are like really in it. And yeah, that wasn't the case. That wasn't the
Yes.
case 5 years ago.
Yeah, same. And like it's interesting. Oh, which is so weird. My whole thing was started 5 years ago too. Like
Synchronicity.
2020, yeah, 2018, 2019. So yeah, same. So like when I started this, it also evolved too, right? Like at first I got into this through psychic readings, because of my mother's coffee readings, and then my friends were into psychics, so it was kind of through that. And then through that I got exposed to the spiritual framework, and then like I said, that led to the literature, and then that led to my personal evolution and improvement. And so I got really into the spirituality, right? Because that's what really helped me. So it was also like, oh, whoever at the beginning was with me on the psychic readings, like, may not have come along on the spirituality part, right? Like, as deeply as I went. So, like you, I only have a handful of people that I can share books with, or we can really talk deeply about these concepts. Yeah, there's not too many.
I will say one thing that is, I think, part of this process is that you learn to become more okay with yourself.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's part of the self-love thing. Like I remember there was a period of time where it was like Friday night or Saturday night. And like, if I was by myself, I was just like really down and I was like, firing the text messages off. And because I needed that validation from some type of inclusion of with peers to be okay. And I think what is pretty awesome about the spiritual work doesn't uh completely negate or remove the need for community or acceptance, but it certainly softens it a lot. Like you certainly
Mhm.
have a lot more grace to just kind of just be and be okay. And that's one of the gifts for sure.
Yeah, I agree. That's yeah. It's also sometimes I'm like, well, like it's because if too in the old days, like in my old me would have same like let me just go to it. Like it's Friday night, I'll go to this thing I don't want to go to, and now I'll be like, I don't want to go to
Right.
that,
Right.
so I'll just stay home, and that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you're really honoring your authentic
Hmm.
feelings,
Yeah.
which is beautiful. One question, switching gears a little bit. So you had this kind of big transformation experience that sounded like, sometimes people call these the tough times, a dark night of the soul. And you kind of get through it. And it seems like you have learned that the journey isn't over. And
Yeah.
I'd love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah. So what I described earlier was the dark night of the soul, crying on the bathroom with the books and like what's going on. And I feel like, well, writing the book really helped. It helped pull everything together and it got me to a really good place understanding all this, and emotionally, like just by the time I finished writing it and editing it, I feel like I had worked through a lot of, got my nervous system under control, my emotions,
When you
got
say it brought
comfortable.
everything together, what do you mean by that?
In my mind, I had a really hard time reconciling science and spirituality and psychic phenomena and spirituality and these concepts that sometimes seem so at odd. I mean, like at odds with science. Like I just had a hard time reconciling everything mentally and emotionally. But I think also my own journey. It was so much in such a short amount of time that I think I was kind of like frazzled and like, what just happened to me?
Yeah.
Um, and so, yeah, I think writing the book was a cathartic process. And it also helped me mentally and emotionally kind of organize things and understand them. And in a way, like, I mean, in the book, I call it the public funeral for my old self. And I meant it. Like, it was, um, I was putting a piece of me to rest, getting emotional. um,
We can cry on the show.
so putting a piece of me to rest, and it really, and I mean, I wrote that because it was true. Like I felt like I had worked through, I mean, the work is never done, but for that moment in that about that issue, I felt like I understood my old self. And I mean, it would take a little more time to integrate, I think, both sides of myself to be comfortable with both sides, science and spirituality. But that's probably still a work in progress. But I think the book was cathartic. It helped me do that. It helped me put some of these old ideas to rest. It helped me understand it's one universe. It must be the same. Why would we separate
Mm.
spirituality from, like, I don't understand. Now I don't understand. It's funny, before I was like, I don't
Hmm.
understand why you would. And now I'm like, I don't understand why you wouldn't, where you would separate them.
Are you familiar all with kind of a soul initiation process? You learned about that in your readings?
What do you mean? Sounds familiar.
Well, what's so interesting about what you just described is in many traditional rites of passage ceremonies, the whole idea is to basically let the old self die. And
Oh
you're
yeah.
basically saying, goodbye, thank you for your service. It's time for something new. And there's ways that people traditionally have done this: go out into nature for however many days on your own, fast, whatever it is. And they all kind of get at that core thrust. And
Yes.
you basically did that with your book,
Yes.
which is really
Yeah.
cool.
Yes. Yeah, it was that. It was definitely that. And it was so needed. Like looking back, I'm like, how else would I have done that? I mean, I'm sure I would have come up with a way, but it was so cathartic, and it was just very helpful in pulling everything together and understanding. And don't get me wrong, it was not over, obviously, because then I was like, all right, this is great. I understand what happened. I understand. And now I need to leave my apartment and integrate what I have learned and how I've changed. And I need to be true. Like that was one thing I probably still have to work on. I think it's much better now. But in the beginning, um, I would slip back to being like, who am I talking to? Not being authentic, right? Like, who am I
Mm.
talking to? Let me give them the version of myself that I think that they want from me. And usually that was the scientist. And so I had to start being super conscious about doing that. Um, and obviously, it was a balance between feeling safe, right, in myself to be my authentic self, but then also being true to who I am. So that was ongoing because I mean, imagine like I'm coming from being a very hardcore scientist to suddenly like what like everything happens for a reason, and like
Yeah, you're
I don't
like,
know.
how did I become one of these people? Fuck.
Yeah, I am. And I had such a hard time with that. Even after the book, I was like, I can't believe I'm one of these people now. That went on for a while. I think it's over now, hopefully. But that went on for a long time, and it would come through in my interactions with people and my relationships. And I was like, I need to be more conscious about this and aware of when it's happening. And I need to spend time with people where I can be my authentic self and then memorize what that feels like so that I can recognize easily when I'm not being authentic with others. And it's just been a trial and error. It's an ongoing thing. And it's because not, you come up against people, you don't know how people will react. But I will say in some ways, in some instances, it's been again easier than I thought it would be. Like sometimes I think in your head you build up this idea that everyone's going to be like, oh, this is stupid, and oh my god, I can't believe you changed this much. But usually that's not what happened. Usually they'll just be like, oh, cool, and then someone changes the subject or something. um, or they're really into it. Or even better, they'll be like, oh, did you know I was really into X, Y, and Z?
Yeah,
And suddenly
exactly.
now you have this new relationship with this or whatever. So it's usually not as bad as we've made it out to be in our heads, but it is a process to like be conscious of how you're presenting yourself. At least for me, that's how it was, and to try to do it authentically and like feel safe doing it. That's been a process.
Yeah, I think it speaks to what integration really means. I think
Mhm.
integration is this like catch-all phrase thrown around in the psychedelic industry that's like, okay, integration, aka journal and meditate. And it's like, no.
Journal and meditate.
It's
Yeah.
actually like embodied being. And that is like an every moment of every day experience.
Yes.
And not to minimize the help that those things can facilitate that, but it's
Hmm.
much more about kind of like how we engage life, being aware of it, seeing how we respond as things get thrown our way. And
Yeah.
kudos for doing that work.
Yeah. But and I'll say one thing that like sometimes I still can't, this is just jokey, but sometimes I can't believe how much I've changed. But, I used to be very avoidant when it came to confrontation with my friends and stuff. And I was uncomfortable being like mushy too. Like I might tell them I love them, but if we had a fight, it would be hard to be like mushy and vulnerable with them. So so now it's like I try to bring all of this to everything. So now when conflict arises, like I can see again, ego kicks in immediately, has my old behavioral pattern ready to go. And then I have to stop, breathe, take time, think about consciously, you know, not with my mind, which I used to do. That's funny. I would only rationally, like, if there's conflict, I'd rationally go through it and then get tired and then avoid and then be avoidant. But now I'm like, we're not going to be avoidant. That's stupid. That doesn't work. We shouldn't do that. So I would instead think with my heart, right? And I'm like, what do I want to really convey to this person, in this moment of conflict? Usually it's love. Oh my God, I'm getting emotional again. Sorry.
I love
Usually
it.
it's love. And so it's like, okay, how do I just address what the conflict is, but say, I love you. So, and it's really improved my relationships, I think. I mean, I should ask them. But it's nice because I think in the past when maybe both of us would respond with, defensiveness, they also respond like with a more open heart.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful there was an episode I did with a dear friend of mine, Andrew Horn, about taking relational leadership. And, what I find is that like our relationships are the ultimate battleground for our consciousness. Like it's the ultimate experience of like showing us our material, showing us like what we truly believe about ourselves and others. And, what I find is that even when you work on all this, do all this meditation and kind of like isolated work on yourself, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the tools to engage those situations effectively. And so I think this is like a really big thing that's going to become more important.
Yeah.
Is like, how do I consciously communicate? Like, what are like literally like the words that I say to someone when I experience conflict or they hurt me or any of these other feelings that I'm for the first time maybe now acknowledging in my relationships with others?
I completely agree. And actually, I started writing a second book, and some of it is this because I felt like I needed that, or I feel like I've had to navigate this, right? Like all on my own, or just follow my intuition, which is fine. But it would be nice if I had examples. I feel like our culture is so like emotion deprived, or so like, we're deprived of healthy ways to express our emotions. We don't even know what that looks like or sounds like. And I had to go follow like all these Instagram accounts of psychologists who like focus on communication and relationships to get examples of like, what does this mean to communicate in a way? And I learned a lot from those. And I thought that's what we need. We need more examples because I've read a lot of, psychology books or self-help books, and they don't always provide the words, or they'll just be like, do the work. Well, it's like, what does that mean? Like, or they're like, or tell someone how you're feeling. Well, some of us, don't even know how to get in touch with our own emotions or our feelings. And that and then B, putting them into appropriate words sometimes can be difficult for people. So, it would be nice to have some guidance around that. And you're right. This, like, when you take spirituality into the world, the biggest challenge is going to be how you relate to others, right, with it. And how the biggest test for yourself is, have I incorporated these values? Which, of course, it'll be ongoing, right? It's never like suddenly
our work is never done.
Yeah.
The beauty of consciousness expansion. Well, sign me up for your beta list for your book. That sounds awesome. For those that are listening, I can just quickly drop some things that have been helpful for me. There's a book called Nonviolent Communication. That's a good one. And then Eckhart Tolle has a book or a audio course on relationships. That's also quite good. But yeah, I mean, like my life literally has changed when I went to this, I guess it was a men's retreat called Junto, where they were like, okay, who do you have unfinished business with? And they're like, you're going to send this text message in this template that's like, hey, I've been feeling this way. And when you did this, it made me feel like this. And here's all the things I haven't told you. And like, they just made it so freaking simple to like fill in the blank. And that when I sent that message, it was literally like the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so it's any tools like that, you or people can come across that kind of just like really kind of make it training wheels style for this stuff, I think
Yes.
is so, so awesome.
Yeah, I think that moment, right? That moment after you do something like that is so powerful. You can't even really put it into words. It's like that moment for me and my one of my friends when we had conflict and we just like we had this beautiful quick exchange. Like you were just like again, it goes back to that, oh my God, it can be another way. Like
Mm.
there's a whole other way for this that I didn't know existed. And
And it's
it's
not that,
beautiful.
and like you're allowed to do this. That was another
Mhm.
feeling where it's like, whoa, you're allowed to tell someone that you feel a certain way.
Yes.
Isn't that
Yeah.
isn't that
I think a
crazy?
lot of us just suppress, ignore, avoid, and we don't realize how much that wears on our bodies and our hearts and our souls. Until you do something like that activity, right? And you're like, whoa, I feel so relieved. Like,
Yeah.
and you're like, start to think about all the times you didn't do that. And you're like, oh no, what's like, what am I carrying
There's
around?
been quite an accumulation.
Hmm.
But, the great part is that we have an opportunity to do the work, and to make and to love ourselves. And so, well, Mona, this has been a very fun conversation. I feel like I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. Maybe not our
Me
last
too.
conversation. Um,
I hope not. I
but
love your podcast.
oh, thank you. Well, you're contributing with an amazing episode, and yeah, I want to give you an opportunity to share your book, your Substack, all the ways that people can continue to follow your work and your story.
Yes, yes, yes. So my book is called Proof of Spiritual Phenomena, and it's sold wherever books are sold. But if you go to my website, you can find links there. So my website is monasobhaniphd.com. And I've been writing for the Brave New World of Psychedelic Science Substack, but in January, I'm actually going to launch a brand new one, and you can sign up for that on my website. I just, yesterday, I just added the sign up. So
So
it's there.
much newness dropping. All that's linked in the show notes, everyone. So don't worry, you don't have to memorize it. And Mona, thanks again. Really, really fun, really inspiring, and just keep being a light in the world.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. You too. I love your stuff.
Thanks.